Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events that have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Bangladesh and Myanmar signed deal for the return of Rohingya Muslims who fled Rakhine State. Both sides say that they are still working on the details. Bangladesh Foreign Ministry hopes the displaced people could begin to return within 2 months. Militants killed 235 people at a Sufi mosque in Egypt's deadliest terrorist attack. President Sisi pledges forceful response. World leaders condemn the barbaric act. Zimbabwe's Emerson Mnangagwa takes power 2 days after Robert Mugabe dramatically demits office. New president addresses a packed stadium vowing to serve all citizens. US President Donald Trump names North Korea as state sponsor of terror. American allies Japan, South Korea and Australia welcome the move. China hopes all parties can resolve the issue peacefully. And Justice Dalveer Bhandari, re-elected as the Indian nominee to the International Court of Justice, gets 183 out of the 193 votes in the General Assembly and all 15 votes in the Security Council. Our top focus on the program this week. Bangladesh and Myanmar signed a deal for the return of hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims who fled Myanmar after a recent army crackdown. Myanmar and Bangladesh signed an MOU on the return of possibly hundreds of refugees to their homes in Myanmar's Rakhine State. While the two sides say that they are working on the details, Bangladesh Foreign Ministry said displaced people could begin to return within 2 months. A statement from Suu Kyi's spokesman said that the pact was a win-win situation for both countries. An estimated 6,15,000 Rohingya refugees have fled across the border into Bangladesh since August 25th, when a new outbreak of violence began between the Myanmar military and armed militants in Rakhine State. The crisis has been called ethnic cleansing by the UN and the US. Meanwhile, Rohingya refugees are wary of the accord signed between Myanmar and Bangladesh and are not eager to rush home across the border.
I don't trust the Myanmar government. My husband left 3 times and this is my 2nd time to leave. The Myanmar government is always like this.
We will go back to our country if our demands are met. Our demands are that we are given our citizenship. They also have to give us back our land.
The program right now to talk about this is former diplomat VEENA SIKRI. Ambassador, welcome and thank you for joining me on the program. What do you make of the deal that has been signed between Bangladesh and Myanmar, and is it going to stick?
It's a move in the right direction. At least Myanmar and Bangladesh are talking to each other. But the effectiveness of this, it's not even an agreement. It's called an arrangement.
Arrangement, yeah.
An arrangement for the return of the people. So, there are very few details. Neither government has released the text. What is the methodology they're going to follow? When will the process start? How will it start? There's probably going to be a working group constituted within 3 weeks, and then they say within 2 months some movement should take place. But one thing to recall is that this is not the first time that there's been this influx of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh. This has been going on since the 1970s.
Yes.
The first time was in 1978, the second time was in 1991, the third big time was 2016, just last year. And this is the 4th very major event. Now, the last such arrangement or agreement was concluded between Myanmar and Bangladesh in 1992. And under that, there were some very strict considerations and very strict determinants to allow for anybody to go back to Myanmar. And that included proof of stay in Myanmar. Your grandfather should have been born there, whether you fulfill the criterion to get the permission to stay in Myanmar. Because, of course, citizenship is a very long call because the 1982 citizenship law does not allow the Rohingyas to get first-class citizenship. So, but still, if their grandfather has been there and subsequently there have been proof that everybody is there, proof of ownership of land and so on. At one point, the Bangladesh government was very reluctant to agree to anything which remotely resembled the 1992 agreement. But clearly this time there are similarities between the 1992 agreement and the one concluded 2 days ago. So whether this will be equally slow, that 1992 agreement went on right till 2005 before it was more or less informally ended. And so there is not much evidence about how effectively it's going to be. Secondly, we are seeing a very great reluctance from among the Rohingyas who are now fairly well ensconced in camps in Bangladesh to rush back into Myanmar because they're now wanting guarantees of citizenship, guarantees of return of land. All this is very difficult because obviously Myanmar has to follow its own laws, including its citizenship laws. And there also has to be proof that you've been staying there. And there is, of course, the evidence that some of the people who are living now in the camps may well be of Bangladeshi origin themselves. It's very difficult to tell.
Sure, it is very difficult to tell. But, you know, going forward, can we expect some kind of pressure from external factors or external agencies like the UN? You know, Kofi Annan came out with a report before the attack actually happened and the exodus began. So what kind of external pressure do we on Myanmar and Bangladesh going forward?
At the moment, the pressure on Myanmar is quite high. You've seen statements by Secretary of State of the USA. But I would say one thing here, that it's a very complex situation. There are a number of factors. You cannot assume off the cuff that all these 6,22,000 who have gone in the last 2 months to Bangladesh and maybe another 3 or 4 lakhs who are already living in Bangladesh are actually all Myanmar nationals. I think that assumption cannot be made. So obviously when you are going to sift through the details, it's going to be a very complex process. The Kofi Annan report calls for a review of the citizenship laws and so on, so that is up to the government of Myanmar. But there's also this whole question of the terrorism, the question of radicalization, the question of terrorist groups. And when the 2016 events happened about a year ago, at that time, in December 2016, the International Crisis Group published a report on the situation, and they spoke about this terrorist group called the Haraka al-Yaqin, which is based in Saudi Arabia and led by Pakistan-origin Rohingyas, and spoke about the complete radicalization. Now there is ARSA.
But Ambassador, are the Rohingya really to blame? Because if you look at their plight, it is a humanitarian crisis and they seem to be soft targets because at the end of the day, it seems like they'll go to anyone who gives them even a meal a day. So their plight is deplorable at this point in time. So how do you deal with a situation like this?
I think the humanitarian aspect is very important, and certainly that's why India has rushed a lot of relief to the refugees, and the Prime Minister of India and others have spoken about 2 aspects. One is the importance of development of the Rakhine region so that the people who do go back and who are resettled there find economic employment and they share in economic prosperity. So the Prime Minister of India has spoken about development projects in the state of Rakhine. And the second thing is, but this is also very important, that you must assure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Myanmar. Now that too our Prime Minister spoke about, because unless you can assure that, you will not get any cooperation from the government of Myanmar.
Sure,
so I think these 2 aspects have to go side by side.
It's a delicate balancing act. We need to see what really happens in the time to come. But thank you so much, Ambassador Sikri, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, moving on now, of course, at least 235 people have been killed and scores more injured in a bomb and gun assault on a mosque in Egypt's North Sinai. A hunt for the attackers has been launched with no one claiming responsibility so far. Egyptian president has said that security forces would respond with brutal strength and has declared 3 days of national mourning. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi joined world leaders and organizations in condemning the deadliest attack Egypt has ever seen in recent times.
Deadliest attack in Egypt's modern history. A crowded Sufi mosque in northern Sinai during Friday prayers targeted by militants. Terrorists first detonated a bomb in Al-Rawda Mosque in the town of Bir al-Abed, and fleeing worshippers were then shot. The gunmen also opened fire on ambulances as they were transporting wounded worshippers before the arrival of security forces. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi vowed to respond to the attack with brutal force.
The military and police will return security and stability with absolute power in the coming short period of time. We will respond to this attack with brutal strength to encounter these terrorist extremists.
The Egyptian military began a hunt for the attackers, combing the area of assault. While no one has claimed responsibility, the strike bears the hallmarks of an attack by the Islamic State. The mosque is known as the birthplace of an important Sufi cleric. 3 days of national mourning has been declared.
They entered the mosque from outside, almost 10 to 20 people with weapons, and they destroyed everything. Some were wounded, but those killed were much more.
Egyptian security forces have for years been fighting an Islamist insurgency in the Sinai Peninsula, and militants affiliated with Islamic State have been behind scores of deadly attacks in the desert region. After the mosque attack, Egyptian military conducted airstrikes on targets in nearby mountains. Prime Minister Narendra Modi condemned the terror attack and said India resolutely supports the fight against all forms of terrorism and stands with the people and the Egyptian government. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj also condemned the attack. Governments in the UK, US, France, Russia, Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia and elsewhere deplored the massacre. Donald Trump tweeted, "We have to get tougher and smarter than ever before, and we will. Need the wall, need the ban." The United Nations Security Council and Secretary General Antonio Guterres called the assault a heinous and cowardly terrorist attack and called for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. Arab League condemned the attack as a terrifying crime. Israel expressed solidarity, lighting up Tel Aviv's Municipal Hall in Egypt's national colors. The iconic Eiffel Tower switched off lights in tribute to the victims. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, after days of political turmoil, Zimbabwe got its new president on Friday. Emmerson Mnangagwa was sworn in as the president at a grand ceremony held in the National Sports Stadium in Harare. Thousands of supporters thronged the stadium cheering the new president, who is also referred to as the crocodile. A number of dignitaries and foreign diplomats were also in attendance. Opposition leaders also attended at the event. Soon after taking oath, Mnangagwa addressed the packed stadium, pledging to serve all Zimbabweans. He said he was deeply humbled to take the role of the president. He also paid tribute to his predecessor Robert Mugabe, calling him a father, mentor, comrade in arms and his leader. Mnangagwa's swearing in follows the dramatic departure of Robert Mugabe after 37 years of authoritarian rule. It was the sacking of Mnangagwa, Mugabe's vice president at that time, that prompted the military to take control. Mnangagwa had fled the country after being sacked but returned to a hero's welcome on Wednesday.
Let me at this stage pay special tribute to one of and the only surviving founding father of our nation, Comrade Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He led us in our struggle for national independence. He assumed responsibilities of leadership at the formative and a very challenging time at the birth of our nation. That is to be lauded and celebrated for all times.
Well, let's now take a look at what transpired earlier in the week in Zimbabwe.
Thousands of Zimbabweans poured out onto the streets of capital Harare, celebrating the resignation of Robert Mugabe, who quit on Tuesday after days of political turmoil. The former president ruled the country for nearly 37 years, first as Prime Minister and later as President. People danced in jubilation, with some holding posters of Emmerson Mnangagwa and Army Chief General Constantino Chiwenga.
I was born in 1980. Mugabe was in power. Up to today, for 3 generations, Mugabe has been in power. Everyone has been suffering because of Mugabe, and nothing was being done. And today marks the new independence.
On behalf of Zimbabwe, I am so happy. We are liberated. I'm so happy for our children, for our generation. I believe this is the new generation. This is the new beginning.
The joy that you are seeing is because The young are looking forward to getting jobs. The young are looking forward to a better future. The young are looking forward to a glorious Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe's neighbors and the international community welcome the change, hoping the transition will be smooth and peaceful.
A moment of hope for Zimbabwe and for the people of Zimbabwe. For 37 years, they've been languishing under the rule of a despot who impoverished their country. And what we hope now is that this will be a turning point, a moment when they can go forward to free, fair, democratic elections.
China's friendly policy towards Zimbabwe will not change. We are willing to continue with mutually beneficial cooperation, win-win principle, and to actively strengthen cooperation with Zimbabwe and bring China-Zimbabwe's friendly relations to a new platform.
Political experts, however, say Mnangagwa is not the obvious face of change. He was Robert Mugabe's right-hand man for years and only fell out of favor when the former First Lady Grace Mugabe's political influence increased. Mnangagwa himself faces many accusations of corruption and human rights abuses that tarnished Mugabe's own record. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
It's time for a short break now, but still to come, big diplomatic victory for India. Indian nominee Justice Dalveer Bhandari re-elected as ICJ judge after a hotly contested race with the UK. That and much more on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I'm Dr. Ravi Mehrotra. I direct the National Institute of Cancer Prevention of ICMR, which is located at Noida. I'm going to talk about how more than 60% of all cancers occurring in our country are preventable. Please keep watching PEREIRA.
Enter the majestic forecourt of Rashtrapati Bhavan and you'll come across the Jaipur column. A gift to the Viceroy from Savai Madho Singh, the Maharaja of Jaipur, to commemorate the creation of the new capital. The 145-meter high column is crowned with 6 pointed crystal stars on a bronze lotus, and inside the stone shaft runs a steel tube which weighs a little more than 5 tons. The base of the column has text conceived by Lord Irwin and Sir Edwin inscribed on it.
Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that she would prefer new elections to leading a minority government. This after talks on forming a three-way coalition failed, plunging the country into political crisis. Merkel said she was skeptical about ruling in a minority government. She also said that she did not see any reason to resign from her post despite the failed negotiations. The failure of talks raises the prospect of a new election and casts doubt about Merkel's future after 12 years in power. However, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier told parties they owed it to the voters to try to form a government. Steinmeier said Germany was facing the worst governing crisis in the 68-year history of its post-World War II democracy.
The
path towards a minority government for a stable country, for a country that has so many challenges to deal, is one that would have to be thought about very carefully. I think that new elections would be the better path.
This is the moment where all parties involved need to stop for a moment and rethink their position. All political parties that have been voted to German parliament are committed to the public interest.
Well, President Donald Trump, in the latest demonstration of increased tensions on the Korean peninsula, placed North Korea back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Trump announced the move on Monday during a public meeting with his cabinet at the White House and said the Treasury Department will announce new sanctions against North Korea. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said on Monday that the move to designate North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism will help dissuade third parties from supporting Pyongyang.
I call it the peaceful pressure campaign. The president calls it the maximum pressure campaign, so there's no confusion. They're one and the same. And I think this is, though, to hold North Korea accountable for a number of actions that they've taken.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Tuesday welcomed the US president's move to put North Korea back on a list of state sponsors of terrorism, saying it would ramp up pressure on Pyongyang.
Japan welcomes and supports US designation of North Korea as sponsor of terrorism as to increase the pressure on the nation.
Other leaders too welcomed the move, saying Kim Jong-un was running a global criminal operation from North Korea and threatened the stability of the region.
Kim Jong-un runs a global criminal operation from North Korea, peddling arms, peddling drugs, engaged in cybercrime, and of course threatening the stability of the region with his nuclear weapons. So that's we strongly welcome that decision, and it mirrors the determination of the international community on bringing North Korea back to its senses that we saw in Manila and Da Nang recently.
Regardless of North Korea's listing as terror sponsor, there is no change in both South Korea and US's will to bring North Korea to the negotiating table through peaceful means. The two countries will continue close cooperation in all levels.
Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry said it hoped all parties could contribute to resolving the issue on the Korean peninsula peacefully.
Korean peninsula situation is highly complex and sensitive now. We hope all parties could contribute to resolve the issue on the Korean peninsula peacefully by means of dialogue and negotiations.
The designation of North Korea came a week after Trump returned from a 12-day five-nation trip to Asia, in which he made containing North Korea's nuclear ambitions a centerpiece of his discussions. It allows the United States to impose more sanctions on Pyongyang, which is pursuing nuclear weapons and missile programs in defiance of UN Security Council sanctions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. Well, India's Dalveer Bhandari got elected to the International Court of Justice panel of judges in a dramatic fashion after UK withdrew its candidate, bowing before the overwhelming support in the UN General Assembly for the Indian judge. It is being seen as one of the biggest diplomatic victories for India in recent years. This will be the first time in the 71-year-old history of the ICJ that there will be no British judge. Here's a detailed report. Big diplomatic victory for India, Indian nominee to the International Court of Justice, Dalveer Bhandari, was re-elected on Monday, with all but 10 of the UN General Assembly members backing him. Bhandari received 183 of the 193 votes in the General Assembly and secured all 15 votes in the Security Council for the final vacancy in the ICJ. 70-year-old Bhandari was declared re-elected for a fresh 9-year term at the ICJ after Britain withdrew its candidate Christopher Greenwood from the race.
The jurists, Mr. Ronnie Abraham, Mr. Dalveer Bhandari, Mr. Antonio Augusto Gansado Trindade, Mr. Nawaf Salam, and Mr. Abdul Qawi Ahmed Yusuf has been elected to the International Court of Justice for a term of office of 9 years.
President Ramnath Kovind congratulated Dalveer Bhandari and called the victory a diplomatic milestone. Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu too congratulated Justice Bhandari for the victory, saying that his win signifies India's rising stature on the global stage. Prime Minister Narendra Modi credited the efforts of External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and MEA officials for the re-election of the judge to the prestigious World Court. Meanwhile, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj congratulated Justice Bhandari on his victory.
It's also a personal victory of Justice Dalveer Bhandari, who has been a fine judge. But more important than the individual victory is the victory of India. It shows that India is now emerging as an important nation, and ultimately the British government had to back out.
So let the government not forget that Justice Dalbir Bhandari has already completed one full term. And now he will start his second term. Last time we did not have such tension or such a contest when India's nominee was challenged by one of the P5 countries and one of the strategic partners of India.
This will be the first time since the ICJ was established in 1945 that there will be no British judge. Also, it is for the first time in 70 years a permanent member of the Security Council lost to a non-permanent member for a seat at the ICJ. The ICJ has a bench of 15 judges, 5 of whom are elected every 3 years for a 9-year term. To be elected, the candidate is required to have a majority in both the chambers. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. And finally, all aboard the New York Botanical Gardens holiday train show. The whistles blow as the trains chug along the tracks through many of New York's most popular landmarks, including the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building and the Statue of Liberty. The new Botanical Gardens holiday train show is in its 26th year and has become a must-see holiday tradition. I'm going to leave you with these visuals. Until next time, this is Frank Pereira signing off.